The prairie stretched endlessly, a sea of dry grass swaying beneath the dying light of the sun. Evening had begun its slow crawl across the frontier, smearing the sky with long bands of orange, crimson, and deepening violet. The day was almost gone, yet the world was not quiet. The wind carried with it the faint rustle of cottonwoods by the river, the occasional cry of a hawk circling high above, and the steady creak of saddle leather with every stride of the horse, beneath its rider. The cowboy rode on, his back straight though his body bore the weight of miles traveled. Dust clung to his boots and the hem of his long coat, the trail of a man who had spent more time under the open sky than under any roof. His wide-brimmed hat was pulled low, shading his eyes from the last of the sun's glare. Beneath it, his face was lean and weather-worn, the lines etched deep by years of wind, grit, and silence. He carried no expression but that of quiet endurance, the eye look of a man accustomed to solitude. The river followed him on his right, a narrow companion through the wilderness. Its surface shimmered in the light, each ripple catching fire before fading into shadow. Where the prairie was harsh and dry, the river sang of life, bending reeds at its banks and giving breath to the cottonwoods that leaned over it. The cowboy found comfort in the sound, though he never admitted it aloud. To him, the river was less a friend and more a reminder, proof that in a land this wild, survival was owed not to men, but to the earth and water itself. His horse, a strong bay with a scar across its flank, moved with steady rhythm. The animal's breaths came heavy but even, proof of both loyalty and weariness. The cowboy leaned forward slightly, resting a gloved hand on the horse's neck. "Easy now, boy," he murmured, his voice roughened by disuse. The horse flicked an ear but kept on, knowing the trail as well as its rider did. They had been traveling, since dawn, across land that bore no sign of man, save for the faint trace of wagon ruts long abandoned. The cowboy had seen little that day, no cattle herds, no drifters, no campfire smoke rising from the horizon. Only silence, broken now and then by the wind and the scrape of his spurs. Some men feared such emptiness. For him, it was life. Still, solitude weighed heavy when the sun began to fall. Nights on the frontier carried their own kind of danger. Coyotes prowled the brush, mountain cats roamed the high ridges, and men, lawless men, often moved like shadows, seeking easy prey. A lone rider was an easy mark, and he knew it. His hand often drifted to the revolver at his hip, not in threat, but in habit. The weapon was an extension of himself, a tool as necessary as his horse, as his hat, as his boots. As the sun bled into the horizon, the cowboy's thoughts wandered. He thought of towns he had passed through, small dusty settlements with crooked signs and louder saloons. He thought of faces he had known, most of them already gone, claimed by bullets, drink, or the endless miles of trail. He thought of how a man could ride half his life and still not find a place to stop. He did not dwell on these thoughts long. Men who did were men who often drank themselves hollow. Instead, he let the rhythm of the ride fill him, the beat of hooves, the whisper of the river, the hush of the grass against the wind. Life on the frontier was simple if a man allowed it to be. Ride, eat, sleep, survive. And so he rode, eyes scanning the horizon, not for comfort, but for anything that might bring harm. The air grew cooler as dusk settled. Shadows stretched long across the ground, reaching toward the river like dark fingers. The cowboy adjusted in his saddle, listening closely. It was then he noticed how quiet the land had become, too quiet. The hawk was gone. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Only the river remained, its low murmur carrying just beyond the reeds. The cowboy narrowed his eyes. Instinct told him that silence was no gift. On the frontier, Silence meant something unseen was near. He pulled gently on the reins, slowing his horse. The animal's ears flicked, head turning toward the river. The cowboy followed its gaze, scanning the cottonwoods where the shadows deepened. For a moment, he saw nothing. But then, carried faintly on the wind, came a sound he hadn't heard all day. It wasn't the call of an animal. It wasn't the snap of branches under weight. It was laughter, soft, light, almost musical, so out of place in the vast empty land that it sent a chill down his spine. The cowboy stiffened in the saddle. His horse snorted, uneasy. He turned his head toward the river, every sense sharpened, listening again. The laughter came once more, faint but unmistakable. He frowned beneath his hat. In a land as wild as this, laughter could mean anything. A family camped near the river, a band of travelers resting for the night, or something else entirely. He loosened the reins and gave a quiet click of his tongue. The horse obeyed, stepping toward the sound. The cowboy's hand drifted near his revolver, not in aggression, but in caution. He had learned long ago that on the frontier, the line between discovery and danger was razor thin. And as the sun slipped lower, shadows swallowing the river bend, the cowboy knew his ride was about to take a turn he hadn't expected. The cowboy pulled his horse to a halt, the reins tightening in his hand as the animal tossed its head, ears swiveling toward the sound. The river stretched out beside them, smooth as glass, reflecting the dim glow of the sinking sun. It should have been quiet, the kind of stillness that settled deep into a man's bones at day's end. But it wasn't. There it was again. Laughter. Light and delicate, carried faintly on the breeze, it rose above the hush of the river like silver bells. For a heartbeat, the cowboy thought his mind was playing tricks on him. Out here, a man could go days without hearing another human voice, let alone the sound of laughter. But this was real. He leaned in his saddle, listening closer, letting the sound guide him, his brows furrowed. Whoever it was, they were close. Too close to be hiding a fire or running cattle. Yet there was no smoke curling into the sky. No movement. On the trail, no horses tied along the bank. His hand drifted toward the butt of his revolver, fingers brushing the worn handle. Not a threat yet, but instinct always made him cautious. The frontier wasn't kind to those who ignored their instincts. The horse shifted uneasily, hooves scraping against the dry earth. "Easy now," the cowboy muttered, patting the animal's neck. But even as he spoke, he could feel the tension in the beast. Horses always knew before a man did when something was out of place. He scanned the tree line along the far bank. Cottonwoods stood tall, their branches whispering against the dusk wind. Beyond them, the prairie stretched on, endless and empty. No sign of men, no sign of women, no sign of children. Yet the laughter persisted, followed now by another sound. Splashing. Water, striking water. The cowboy narrowed his eyes. "Well, I'll be," he murmured under his breath. Splashing meant the river. But why? No settler in his right mind would swim in the fading light, not when the night brought cold winds and darker dangers. It could be children, but what children lived this far from the nearest town? It could be travelers, but he'd seen no wagons on the trail for days. A thought stirred uneasily in his chest. Apache. The tribes knew the land better than any white man ever would. They knew the hidden pools, the clearings, the bends in the river where the water ran sweet and cool. And if the laughter he heard belonged to Apache women, then his presence was already dangerous. He dismounted quietly, boots sinking into the soft earth as he tied his horse to a low branch. The animal shook its mane, restless, but stayed put. The cowboy gave it a final pat before slipping into the brush, moving slow, silent. Every step brought him closer to the sound. Laughter again, soft and playful. A splash, followed by a voice speaking words he couldn't fully understand. but the rhythm of them, the tone, he knew enough. Apache tongue. The cowboy froze, crouched low in the shadow of a cottonwood. His heart beat faster now, though his face remained calm. He had no quarrel with the Apache, but he had heard stories enough to know how they felt about trespassers. He crept further, careful not to snap a twig or rustle a branch. The brush thickened near the bend of the river, where reeds rose tall and wildflowers nodded in the cooling air. He pressed his hand against a rough trunk, leaning in just enough to peer through a gap in the leaves. What he saw made him draw a sharp breath. There, at a hidden bend of the river, the water spread into a pool as still as polished glass. The sun's last light glimmered across its surface, painting the scene in gold. And in the heart of that pool were 3 women, their hair dark and long, their voices low and melodic. One laughed as she flicked water at another, the splash catching fire in the fading light. The third stood with her back to him, humming a tune so soft it seemed to weave into the river itself. The cowboy froze. He hadn't meant to find this, not now, not ever. For a moment he could do nothing but watch. He wasn't a man given to awe, not after years on the trail, but there was something about the sight that struck him deep. It wasn't just their beauty, it was the freedom, the unguarded life in them. They were untouched by the saloon smoke, by the endless dust of cattle drives, by the weight of the frontier's cruelty. But awe quickly gave way to fear. He knew what this meant. If they discovered him, his life might not be worth a silver dollar. Apache warriors would not hesitate to cut down a white man who spied upon their women. His revolver suddenly felt useless. No bullet could protect him from the wrath that would follow. The silence struck harder than the snap of the twig itself. It was sudden, heavy, the kind of silence that pressed into a man's chest and made his heart hammer twice as loud. The cowboy froze, every muscle stiff, his breath caught in his throat. The pool that only a moment ago had rung with laughter now lay still, a mirror reflecting the glow of dying sunlight. 3 figures stood motionless in the water, as if the river itself had turned to stone. The first woman turned her head slowly, her dark hair dripping down her back in a long, glistening sheet. Her eyes swept the brush where the sound had come from. The cowboy held his breath, praying the shadows would keep him hidden. But her gaze was sharp, unrelenting. It cut past the reeds, through the dimming light, until at last it found him. Their eyes met. For the cowboy, time stopped. He had seen gunfights at dawn, cattle stampedes that crushed men under hoof, and storms that ripped across the plains like God's own fury. But never had he felt a chill like this. The look in her eyes was not fear. It was not even surprise. It was recognition. She knew what he was. She knew what it meant for him to be here. The second woman drew closer to the first, whispering something in their tongue, her voice low but urgent. The third, the one who had been humming, bent down swiftly, her hand closing around a smooth stone from the riverbed. She rose again, her stance shifting, the stone gripped like a weapon ready to be hurled. The cowboy's mouth went dry. He hadn't meant to see this. Hell, he hadn't meant to see anything at all. But out here, meaning made no difference. A man could stumble into his grave just as quick as he stumbled into a secret. He thought to back away slowly, melt into the shadows and hope the night covered his tracks. But it was too late. The first woman spoke, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the water like the toll of a bell, "White Rider." The cowboy stiffened at the words. Her English was accented but sharp, her tone cutting through the twilight air. "You stand where you should not," she continued. "Why?" The cowboy raised his hands slowly, a gesture of peace. His revolver was heavy at his hip, but he knew drawing it would be the end of him. No gun was quick enough to silence the cry that could summon a dozen warriors. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady, I didn't come here to spy. I was just riding along the river. Heard voices, that's all. Didn't mean no harm. The three women exchanged glances. Their words spilled quickly in Apache, too fast for him to understand fully. He caught fragments: Tweezy, horse; Nashdoitso, white man; Dine, people. The tones were sharp, urgent. The one with the stone took a step forward, her eyes hard as flint. "If our brothers find you here," she said, her English rough but certain, "you will not leave. They will kill you where you stand." The cowboy's stomach tightened. He knew she wasn't bluffing. He'd heard the stories, whispered in saloons and campfires, of men who stumbled too close to Apache ground and were never seen again. He'd thought them half-truths, warnings to scare greenhorns. But standing here now, watching the fire in their eyes, he knew they were true. His hand stayed raised, his hat brim dipping low to shadow his eyes. "I don't doubt that," he said softly. "And I reckon I'd deserve it, if I came here with bad intent. But I didn't. I was just riding. That's the truth of it." The leader, the one whose gaze first locked with his, did not answer right away. She studied him, her expression unreadable, caught somewhere between suspicion and curiosity. The river glowed faintly around her, reflecting her stillness. The cowboy shifted slightly, careful not to move too quick. "I'll walk away now," he said. "Leave this place behind me. You'll never see me here again." The woman with the stone let out a sharp hiss in Apache. Her words aimed at the leader. She gestured toward him, her meaning clear. "He cannot be allowed to leave." The leader silenced her with a glance. She lifted her chin, eyes never leaving the cowboy. Her stare was heavy, unblinking, like a hawk sizing up its prey. The cowboy stood rooted, every nerve screaming at him to run, every instinct warning him that running would mean death. He had stumbled into something sacred, something not meant for the eyes of outsiders. And now, his fate balanced on the judgment of the women before him. The river whispered softly around their still forms. The cottonwoods stirred in the wind. Somewhere far off, a coyote gave a mournful cry. The cowboy's heart hammered in his chest. He knew the next word spoken would decide whether he walked away or was left to the buzzards. The leader's gaze didn't waver. She stood tall in the shallows, water glistening around her as if the river itself was her shield. The cowboy could see her jaw tighten, her lips pressed thin as she considered him. Her silence was louder than any threat, and he knew his life hung in the balance. Finally she spoke. "You should not be here." Her words were quiet, but carried the weight of a verdict. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly, his hands still raised. "I know it, ma'am. Believe me, if I'd known this was your place, I'd have kept riding. I meant no offense." The second woman, narrow-eyed, sharp as a blade, stepped forward. "He lies. White men always lie. They come with guns, with chains, with fire. He saw us. He cannot leave." Her voice struck hard, and the woman with the stone nodded fiercely, echoing in their tongue. "We cannot let him go." The leader raised a hand, silencing them both. Then she looked at the cowboy again, as if searching him for something. Truth, perhaps, or weakness. "You carry no fear," she said at last. "Most white men who find us run, or they reach for their guns. But you—" She studied the set of his shoulders, the calm in his stance. "You stand still." The cowboy let out the faintest of breaths. "Maybe I'm just too tired to run," he said, his voice steady. "Been on the trail too long. Or maybe I reckon a gun won't help me none if I've already done wrong." Her eyes narrowed, but there was the faintest flicker of something else, something softer, behind them. Not forgiveness, but curiosity. The second woman hissed again. "Sister, you cannot—" The leader cut her off. "Quiet." Then she turned back to him. Do you know where you stand? The cowboy hesitated. He glanced at the river, at the trees, at the faint carvings on the rocks near the water's edge. Symbols he didn't recognize but understood enough to know they were sacred. He shook his head slowly. No, ma'am. But I can see it matters. This place? He paused, searching for the right words. It ain't just water and stone to you. The leader's expression softened just slightly, though the fire in her gaze never dimmed. She stepped out of the water, rising gracefully, the current sliding from her form as she stood on the riverbank. The other two women followed close behind, like shadows. This pool, she said, gesturing to the shimmering bend of the river, is not for your kind to see. It is for us, for our mothers, and their mothers before them. Here we sing the old songs. Here we ask the river to carry our prayers. No white man has ever looked upon it and lived. The cowboy's mouth went dry. He had stumbled not just into their bathing pool, but into something far deeper, something spiritual, sacred. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to speak. I didn't mean to take what wasn't mine. I swear it. A man on the trail. He don't always choose where his horse carries him. The leader tilted her head. And yet here you are? The words hung heavy between them. The woman with the stone stepped forward again, her voice sharp. He knows too much. If he leaves, he will tell others. They will come. They always come. The cowboy shook his head quickly. No. You got my word. I don't breathe a word of this to no one, not a soul, the second woman scoffed. Words, always words. But the leader's eyes lingered on him. She studied his weathered face, the lines etched from years in the saddle, the steady, calm in his eyes. Something about him was different from the others she had seen, those who came to take and destroy. Perhaps, she said softly, the spirits led you here. The cowboy blinked, startled. The spirits? She nodded once. This river has its own will. It carries men to places they should not go, sometimes to test them, sometimes to punish them. Perhaps it brought you here to see if your heart carries truth. The cowboy shifted, uneasy at the weight of her words. Ma'am, I ain't one to argue with spirits. All I know is, I mean no harm. If it's my time to die, then I'll face it. But I won't lie to you. That's not the kind of man I am. The leader regarded him for a long, heavy moment. The air around them seemed to still, as though the river itself held its breath. At last, she lowered her hand, the one that had been poised to signal his fate. You will leave, she said. Tonight. You will not return. You will forget this place. The cowboy nodded slowly, relief washing through him, though he kept his face steady. Yes, ma'am, you have my word. But just as he turned to step back into the shadows, she added one more sentence, her voice carrying an edge he could not ignore. If you break your word, you will not see another sunrise. The cowboy tipped his hat in silent acknowledgement. He knew she meant it, and as he backed away, the river whispering behind him, he realized something deep in his bones. He had not merely trespassed on their land. He had trespassed on a secret far greater than he could understand. The cowboy's boots crunched softly against the gravel as he began to retreat. His chest rose and fell, steady but taut, each breath measured. He had survived the first judgment, but something in the leader's eyes told him this wasn't over. Not yet. The three women did not move. They stood like sentinels by the river's edge, their silhouettes framed by the fading glow of dusk. The leader's presence was commanding, rooted as firm as the cottonwoods. Her two companions, though restless, waited on her signal. You say you mean no harm, she called after him. But words are wind. The river does not trust wind. The cowboy froze mid-step. He knew better than to ignore her. Slowly, he turned back, keeping his hands open at his sides. "What would you have me do, then?" The leader exchanged a brief glance with the woman who still gripped the stone. The latter's expression hardened into something sharp, predatory. She muttered a few words in Apache, quick, clipped syllables. The cowboy didn't catch them, but he didn't have to. He could feel the weight in her tone. The leader stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound on the damp earth. "If you wish to leave this place alive," she said, "you must prove that you speak true, that you are not like the others." The cowboy's brow furrowed beneath the brim of his hat. "And how am I supposed to do that?" Her answer came without hesitation. "By giving us something you cannot take back." The cowboy's pulse kicked up a notch. His hand instinctively brushed near his belt, near the revolver, near the pouch where he kept the small things that mattered. His tobacco tin, a locket with a faded picture, the last keepsake of his mother. "I ain't sure I follow," he said carefully. The leader's gaze flicked to his hip. "Your gun," she said. The cowboy stiffened. His gun wasn't just iron and wood. It was survival. Out here, a man without his gun was a man stripped bare, defenseless. "That ain't a small ask," he replied, his voice tight. The woman with the stone smirked, her lips curving into something cruel. "Then die with it." The leader raised her hand again, silencing her companion. But her eyes stayed fixed on him, unwavering. "If you speak truth," she said, "you will give it. If you lie, then it is already useless to you." The cowboy's throat worked as he swallowed hard. His mind raced, weighing his choices. He could refuse and risk them cutting him down on the spot, or he could surrender it and pray they honored their word. His hand hovered near the holster, and the world seemed to narrow, down to the weight of the Colt, the press of the leather, the measured breaths of the women before him. Finally, he unbuckled the strap and drew the revolver slowly, turning it in his hand so the barrel pointed down. Then, with a deliberate motion, he held it out, grip first, to the leader. The other two women tensed, ready to strike if he so much as twitched wrong. But the leader stepped forward, her eyes never leaving his, and accepted the weapon. The weight of it looked strange in her hand. She tested it briefly, her fingers grazing the trigger, then lowered it to her side. "You speak truth," she said at last, "for a liar would have died clutching this." Relief flickered in the cowboy's chest, though he kept it buried under his calm exterior. "Then we're square?" he asked, but the leader shook her head. "Not yet." His jaw tightened. "What more?" "You must carry our word with the same weight as your weapon," she said. "If you ever speak of this place, if another white man sets foot here because of your tongue, we will know, and we will come for you." The cowboy nodded once. "I ain't got no reason to tell a soul." "You have my word." The woman with the stone snorted. "Your word is worth less than ash." But the leader silenced her again with a glance, then turned back to the cowboy. For the first time, her expression softened, just a fraction. "Perhaps. But tonight, I will trust it." The cowboy shifted uneasily. He felt stripped bare without the Colt at his side, like a man walking into a storm without his coat. Still, he straightened his shoulders, meeting her eyes with quiet resolve. "Then I'll keep riding," he said, "and you'll never see me again." The leader studied him a moment longer, then inclined her head slightly. "Go. The river has tested you. Whether it spares you or not, that is no longer for me to say." The cowboy turned, the sound of the river fading behind him. But as he stepped back into the darkening brush, one truth pressed hard in his chest. This was no simple escape. By handing over his weapon, by offering his word, he had bound himself to something greater than his own life. And deep down, he knew this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. The cowboy pushed his way through the thicket, the shadows lengthening as night crept across the land. Every step felt heavier without the Colt resting at his hip. The familiar weight that had always been his reassurance, his shield, was gone, and in its place was only the echo of the Apache leader's voice warning him, "If you break your word, you will not see another sunrise." His horse nickered softly where he'd tied it near the cottonwoods. The cowboy rubbed the animal's neck, his fingers lingering there as if drawing strength from the warm hide. He swung into the saddle and turned the horse toward the ridge, away from the river. The trail stretched into darkness, but he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes still followed him, watching, measuring. As the moon rose higher, the cowboy set up camp beneath a cluster of pines. He kept the fire small, just enough to ward off the chill, though every crackle of the flames made him glance toward the trees. He had survived the exchange, but something deep in his gut told him it wasn't finished. And he was right. Not long after midnight, the horse's ears pricked forward. A soft rustle echoed in the brush. The cowboy's hand went instinctively to his side, only to find empty space where his gun should be. He cursed under his breath, scanning the shadows, a whisper of movement. Then another. They were not alone. Out of the darkness stepped 3 Apache warriors, their figures lean and silent, weapons glinting faintly in the firelight. Their faces were hard, their expressions unreadable. The cowboy rose slowly to his feet, his palms open at his sides. One of the warriors barked something sharp in Apache. Though the cowboy couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. "What are you doing here?" Before he could answer, a 4th figure emerged from the trees, the leader of the women. She stepped into the firelight, her presence commanding even here, far from the sacred pool. The warriors quieted instantly, though. Their eyes burned with suspicion. The cowboy's jaw tightened. "You again?" he muttered, though his voice carried no disrespect. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You camped too close to the river." He tilted his head. "I thought I was leaving. Didn't reckon I'd find trouble. Following me?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "They are my brothers. They guard this place. When they saw your fire, they wished to kill you." The cowboy's brows lifted. "Can't say I'm surprised." Her gaze narrowed slightly. "I told them you gave your weapon to me, that you spoke truth." The warriors shifted, murmuring among themselves. One of them scowled deeply, gesturing with his spear as if questioning her judgment. The cowboy felt the tension coil tighter. "Sounds like they ain't too convinced." "They are not," she admitted. "They do not trust you. They believe I was wrong to let you go." He gave a wry smile. "Well, ma'am, I can't say I blame 'em. If the boot was on the other foot, I'd feel the same." Her eyes flicked to him sharply, as though his honesty caught her off guard. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the restless snort of his horse. Finally, she stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "If you wish to leave alive, you must do more than hand over a, weapon. You must show them your heart." The cowboy frowned. "And how exactly do I do that?" She considered him for a moment, then glanced at the warriors before answering. "At dawn, you will ride with us. There is a place where we go to honor the dead. If you carry no fear, if you carry respect, they will see it. If not..." Her voice trailed, but the meaning was clear. The cowboy let out a slow breath. His life, once again, balanced on the edge of a knife. "I reckon I don't have much choice, do I?" Her eyes softened just slightly. "No. But perhaps the spirits have chosen you for a reason." The cowboy gave a short, dry laugh. "Spirits sure have a funny way of showing it." The warriors still watched, tense and restless, their hands never far from their weapons. But they did not strike. Not yet. The leader had spoken for him, and for now, that was enough to keep him breathing. The cowboy sat back down by the fire, his eyes never leaving hers. He realized something then, something he hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't just his judge. She was his only chance, and for the first time since stumbling upon the hidden river, he wondered if fate hadn't led him there for more than just a trial of survival. The first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the horizon, washing the land in shades of silver and rose. The cowboy had slept little, if at all. Each time he closed his eyes, he felt the weight of the warrior's stares and the sound of the leader's words echoing in his head. "At dawn, you will ride with us." Now the moment had come. His horse stamped the earth nervously as the Apache warriors mounted their own ponies. They were silent, efficient, their movements sharp as flint. The leader appeared last, striding from the shadows of the trees with quiet authority. She wore a deerskin cloak that caught the early light, her long braids swaying with each step. When she mounted her horse, the others instinctively gave her space, though their distrust still simmered like embers. The cowboy swung into his saddle, feeling strangely exposed without his colt. He gave the leader a nod, though his jaw was tight. "Lead the way." She said nothing at first, only spurred her horse forward. The warriors flanked him on either side, their spears upright, their dark eyes cutting into him like knives. The cowboy sat tall, refusing to let his unease show. He'd ridden through outlaw ambushes, survived border skirmishes, even crossed deserts where the sun itself tried to kill a man, but never had he felt so utterly measured, so completely, judged with every breath. The small party moved along the riverbank, the water glimmering with the light of morning. The air smelled fresh, sharp with pine and damp earth. The cowboy glanced at the leader riding just ahead. Even in the saddle, she carried herself with a quiet dignity, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the land as though every ridge and hollow belonged to her. He found himself speaking before he meant to. "I don't reckon you told me your name." The warriors tensed, one snapping his gaze toward him, hand tightening on his spear. But the leader raised her hand slightly, halting their aggression. She glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. "Names are not gifts we give, freely to strangers," she said. He gave a faint nod. "Fair enough. But if I'm riding with you, maybe I ain't a stranger no more." Her lips twitched, almost but not quite into a smile. "We will see." The trail narrowed, climbing into rocky hills. The cowboy's horse picked its way carefully, hooves clattering on loose stone. Below, the river curved away like a silver ribbon vanishing into the horizon. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by the cry of a hawk and the low murmur of the warriors speaking in their tongue. The cowboy couldn't understand their words, but he knew the tone. They spoke of him, whether he was a fool, a threat, or a man worth sparing. Finally, as the sun climbed higher, the leader slowed her horse beside his. Her gaze flicked to him, studying the lines of his face, the weariness in his eyes. "You are far from your people," she said. He met her eyes. "Ain't much waiting for me back there." Her brows drew together slightly. "No family?" He hesitated. "None left." Something softened in her gaze, though she quickly masked it. She looked ahead again, her voice quiet. "Then perhaps the spirits guided you here for a reason." The cowboy let out a dry chuckle. "Spirits, fate. Funny how folks always say that when a man stumbles into trouble." She turned back, sharper this time. "Not trouble, a test." Her words lingered in the cool morning air, heavier than he expected. By midday, they reached a plateau overlooking a wide valley. The land stretched open, dotted with sagebrush and the faint smoke of distant fires. At the center of the plateau stood a stone circle, ancient, weathered, marked with carvings he couldn't begin to understand. The warriors dismounted, tying their ponies nearby. The leader motioned for the cowboy to do the same. "This is a place of our dead," she said. "Here, the truth of a man is seen. Here, the spirits judge." The cowboy dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the earth with a dull thud. He scanned the stone circle, his chest tightening. He didn't know what kind of test lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. There would be no bluffing his way through this. The leader stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. If you carry only lies in your heart, they will devour you. If you carry truth, they may let you walk free. He gave a small nod, his voice low but steady. Then I reckon it's time I meet your spirits. Her gaze lingered on him, searching, weighing. For the first time, he thought he saw something more than suspicion in her eyes, something like respect. The warriors formed a circle around the stones. The leader gestured for him to step inside, and as he crossed the boundary, the cowboy knew this ride wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving who he was, not just to them, but to himself. The stone circle loomed before him, silent yet heavy with meaning. The carvings etched into the rocks, spirals, animal figures, and symbols, worn smooth by centuries of wind, seemed to hum with a life of their own. The cowboy stood at its edge, the weight of every gaze on him. The Apache warriors formed a ring. Outside the stones, their weapons grounded but ready. Their eyes were sharp, waiting for the first sign of weakness. The leader remained apart from them, closer to him, her presence calm but unwavering. She pointed toward the circle. "Step inside," she said, her voice carrying like a command and a prayer all at once. The cowboy swallowed, his throat dry, and stepped forward. The instant his boots crossed into the circle, a hush fell over the world. The wind stilled. The call of birds vanished. Even his own heartbeat seemed louder than it should have been. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air shifted. A strange heaviness pressed down on him, like the land itself was watching. He blinked, and the world around him blurred. The warriors at the edge seemed to fade, their figures melting into shadows. The only face he could still see clearly was hers. The leader, standing just outside, her eyes locked on him, unblinking, waiting. The cowboy turned slowly. The circle of stones seemed larger now, stretching wider, the carvings glowing faintly, as though lit from within. A low hum rose from the earth, crawling up through his boots, into his bones. Then came the visions. At first, they flickered like heat waves, shapes of people, Apache warriors, women and children, elders, all standing in silence. Ghostly figures with paint on their faces, feathers in their hair, scars across their skin. Their eyes bore into him, questioning. The cowboy's hand twitched toward his hip, only to remember again the absence of his Colt. He let his arm fall. No iron, no steel, only himself. One of the figures stepped forward, a tall warrior with a long spear and eyes like fire. His voice was deep, booming, though his lips barely moved. "Why do you trespass?" The cowboy drew in a breath, forcing his voice steady. "I didn't mean to. I was riding the river, looking for nothing but peace. I found your women and I should have turned back, but I didn't. That's on me." The ghost warrior circled him, spear tip brushing the dust. "You are a taker. Your kind takes what is not theirs, land, water, lives. Why should you walk away?" The cowboy's jaw tightened. "I can't speak for all men, just for me, and I ain't here to take nothing. I gave up my gun when asked. I stood my ground when threatened. All I ask is the chance to walk away with my life." "Same as I rode in." The spirits murmured among themselves, voices like wind through dry grass. Another figure emerged, an old woman with lines carved deep into her face. Her eyes, though clouded with age, glimmered with sharpness. "What do you honor, cowboy?" she asked. He hesitated, his throat tight. Memories stirred. His father teaching him to ride, his mother's voice singing low by the fire, the friends he'd buried along the trail. His voice came rough, unsteady. "I honor the ones I lost, folks who didn't have much but gave all they had. I honor the land 'cause it don't bow to no man and it don't forgive easy. And I honor my word, 'cause out here, a man's word's all he's got." The old woman studied him for a long time, then gave a small nod before fading into the shadows. But the trial wasn't over. The fiery-eyed warrior stepped close again, thrusting his spear into the earth at the cowboy's feet. Words are wind. Show your truth. Face the trial. Before the cowboy could answer, the ground beneath him seemed to tremble. From the shadows of the circle rose a massive shape, a spirit beast, part wolf, part bear, eyes glowing like coals. Its growl shook the air, its teeth bared. The cowboy's breath caught. His hand still twitched for a weapon that wasn't there. The leader's voice cut across the silence, steady but distant. Face it without fear. If your heart is true, you will not fall. The beast lunged. The cowboy dodged, rolling across the dust, scrambling back to his feet. The thing was massive, its shadow swallowing him whole. He clenched his fists, steadying his breath. "No gun," he muttered to himself. "Just me." The beast struck again, swiping with claws of shadow. The cowboy ducked low, grabbing a fallen branch from the ground. He swung hard, the wood connecting with a solid thud. The beast howled, staggering back. It circled, growling, and the cowboy's chest heaved. His muscles burned, but his eyes stayed locked on the creature. "I ain't running," he growled. "Not from you, not from anyone." With a roar, he charged the beast, driving the branch like a spear straight into its chest. Light burst from the creature, blinding, searing. It let out one final cry before exploding into sparks that rained across the stones. The circle fell silent again. When the light faded, the ghostly figures were gone. Only the cowboy remained, standing in the center, chest heaving, the broken branch still in his grip. The cowboy stood in the sacred circle, sweat dripping down his brow, his chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. The broken branch lay at his feet, splintered from his struggle with the spirit beast. Though he had survived, he felt as though every muscle in his body had been tested, every part of his soul turned inside out. The silence stretched long and deep. The Apache warriors at the edge of the circle did not move. They studied him as though waiting for something more, something final. The only sound was the rustle of the wind picking up again, weaving through the stones like a voice unseen. Finally, the leader stepped forward, her dark eyes fixed on him, unwavering. "The spirits have spoken," she said, her voice carrying over the circle. "You stood without weapon, without armor, and you did not break. The beast did not devour you. You showed truth." Some of the warriors lowered their weapons slightly, their expressions shifting, not friendly, but no longer murderous. Yet not all were convinced. One warrior stepped forward sharply, his face hard, his voice biting. "Words are easy, and tricks are easier. What if the spirits test us with a false sign? What if this man is no more than a thief who stumbled into our sacred ground?" The cowboy's jaw tightened. He knew better than to speak yet, but his eyes met the man's without wavering. The leader's gaze flicked to her brother, then back to the cowboy. "He did not run," she replied. "He did not lie. He gave his weapon when asked. He faced the trial when challenged. The spirits chose to let him stand. Would you question them?" The warrior's nostrils flared. His hands clenched around the haft of his spear, but he did not step further. Instead, he turned his face away, scowling into the shadows. The others murmured among themselves, voices sharp with disagreement but softened by something deeper, respect for the trial's outcome. The cowboy finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "I didn't come looking for trouble, but I reckon I found it all the same. If the spirits say I walk free, then I thank 'em. And I thank you for giving me the chance." His words carried no arrogance, only weariness and truth. For the first time, the warriors looked at him not as an intruder, but as a man who had stood where few outsiders ever would. The leader nodded once, then raised her hand toward him. "You may go," she said. "The land will not rise against You, and neither will my people, so long as you keep your word." Relief swept through him, though he did not let it show. He tipped his hat low, a quiet gesture of respect. "Then I'll ride on at first light." But even as he spoke, he felt a strange pull in his chest, a reluctance to leave. His eyes lingered, on her, the way her strength carried the weight of her people, the way her presence had shielded him more than once. The warriors began to disperse, melting back into the shadows of the trees. Yet a few still cast glances over their shoulders, suspicion lingering in their eyes. The trial had proven him, but trust was not something given in a single night. When the circle had emptied, only the leader remained with him. She stepped closer, her face calm, unreadable. "You were not meant to see us at the river," she said softly. "Yet you did. And now the spirits have tied your path to ours, if only for a short time." The cowboy's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head slightly. "The spirits do not test without reason. Perhaps they wished you to carry this story with you, to tell others that what is sacred cannot be broken. Or perhaps—" She paused, her eyes searching his. "Perhaps they wished you to understand that not all things in this land can be held by iron and fear." He shifted, uncomfortable beneath her gaze. "Maybe so. All I know is, I walked into something I didn't rightly understand, and I'm walking out different than I came in." Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "That is enough." The cowboy gathered his horse, tightening the saddle straps with hands that still trembled from the trial. The night was fading, the first streaks of dawn brushing the horizon, in pale orange light. He mounted up slowly, then turned back toward the circle one last time. The leader stood there, tall and unmoving, framed by the stones and the rising sun. She raised her hand in a gesture that was neither farewell nor command, but something deeper, a silent recognition. The cowboy tipped his hat once more, his voice low, meant only for her. "Reckon I owe you my life?" Her reply was simple, but it lingered with him long after. "You owe it to the spirits, but perhaps one day you will owe it to yourself." With that, he turned his horse and began the ride back toward the river's edge. The path stretched out before him. He was alive, free, but changed. The verdict had been given, not just by the spirits, but by something greater that stirred inside him. And though the land lay vast and open ahead, a part of him knew he would never truly ride alone again. The cowboy rode slow along the riverbank, the morning sun warming his shoulders. Each step of his horse echoed in the quiet, the rhythm steady, almost solemn. The trial behind him felt both like a dream and a scar, something carved so deep into his memory that no time, no miles could ever erase it. The land stretched wide and open, the way it always had, yet it no longer felt the same. The cottonwoods by the river, the sound of the current, even the hawks circling above, they all seemed alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. As though the spirits he had faced in the circle still lingered, watching, weighing him even now. He pulled his hat low against the rising light, his thoughts heavy. A man like him had always kept to the trail, moving from job to job, saloon to saloon, never staying long enough for roots to take hold. But the Apache had shown him something different, something fierce, something unyielding. They carried their history, their ancestors, their sacred ways, like a fire that never went out. And in that fire he had been tested, tempered like iron. He thought of the leader, her sharp eyes that had cut through his lies before he could even shape them. She had stood between him and death more than once, not out of mercy, but out of conviction. Her strength had left a mark on him deeper than any wound. He wondered if she knew it, if she had seen it in his face when she raised her hand at the circle's edge. The cowboy let out a long breath, the kind a man gives when he knows something's ended, even if he wishes it hadn't. He knew better than to dream of returning, better than to believe he could walk among her people again. He was an outsider, a rider passing through a world not his own. But still, the thought lingered, stubborn as a thorn. Perhaps the spirits had tied more of his trail to hers than he yet understood. The day wore on, the land rolling into stretches of sage and grassland. He stopped once at the river to water his horse. As the animal drank, the cowboy crouched low, cupping his hands to splash cool water over his face. When he looked down at the rippling surface, he hardly recognized the man staring back. His eyes were different, steady, quiet, carrying something that hadn't been there before. He muttered under his breath, "Reckon I ain't the same fool who rode up this river yesterday." The horse snorted as if in agreement, flicking its tail at the flies. By late afternoon, he reached a ridge overlooking the valley he had crossed before. The smoke from distant fires rose faintly into the sky, the sign of villages he knew he'd never see. He paused there, letting his gaze linger one last time on the direction he had come from. Somewhere out there, she was standing tall among her people, carrying the weight of her ancestors with pride. Somewhere out there, the spirits still whispered, watching the paths of men. He touched the brim of his hat, a silent gesture to the wind, to the land, to her. Then he turned his horse westward toward the horizon, where the sky bled gold and crimson. The trail ahead was long, uncertain, but he felt no fear. For the first time in years, maybe in his whole life, he felt like a man who belonged, not to a place, but to himself. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the plains, the cowboy found himself humming under his breath, a tune without words, carried by the rhythm of hooves. The sound was low, steady, almost like a prayer. The spirits had judged him and he had walked away. But their verdict was more than survival. They had forced him to look inward, to see the truth he had been running from. That a man could wander forever and still be lost, unless he carried something true inside him. He rode on, the horizon swallowing him whole, a lone figure against the vastness of the West. And though the world would remember him only as another nameless drifter, the cowboy knew better. He had seen the fire of a people who could not be broken. He had stood in the circle of the spirits and lived, and in the quiet places of his heart, he carried with him the memory of 3 women bathing by the river, a people fierce as the mountains, and a leader whose eyes had seen through him and left him changed. The West was wide, endless, unforgiving. But for the cowboy, it no longer felt empty. It felt alive.